Now let's take a look at each of the exposure modes. You've already set up your camera in the first mode, the programmed auto mode. This mode is represented with a P on the control panel. In this mode, the camera automatically adjusts shutter speed and aperture for optimal exposure. Use this mode when you want to leave the camera in charge of shutter speed and aperture settings. To operate in this mode, hold down the exposure mode button and rotate the main command dial until you see a P on the control panel. Press the shutter button halfway down to activate the viewfinder. You can monitor your exposure settings through the viewfinder or by looking on the control panel. Hold the shutter halfway down to focus, then press the shutter all the way down to take the picture. Programmed auto mode is recommended for snapshots and in other situations where there is little time to adjust camera settings. Before we discuss exposure modes further, it's important to understand a little more about shutter speeds and ISO settings. The shutter speed on your camera ranges from 30 to 1/8,000th, meaning the shutter opens from 30 seconds to 1/8,000th of a second. Choosing a correct shutter speed for the appropriate situation can help you add depth and creativity to your pictures. Shutter speeds can be either very fast or very slow. Let's talk about these speeds for a moment. The most frequently used shutter speeds lie within the range of 1/60th to 1/500th of a second. This is a typical range used for everyday picture taking. Camera speeds slower than 1/60th will normally require a tripod to avoid blurring the entire picture. Faster shutter speeds are found in the range of 1/500th to 1/8,000th. When the camera displays shutter speed with a second marker, it tells the user that this is a measurement of seconds. When no seconds marker is displayed, this is considered a measurement of fractions of a second. For example, 8 with a seconds marker is 8 seconds. The number 8 without a seconds marker is 1/8 of a second. You can view this information on the LCD panel and through the camera's viewfinder. A fast shutter speed of 1/2000th to 1/8000th could be used to freeze the wings of a bee or the blades of a helicopter in flight. A shutter speed of 1/500th to 1/1000th could be good for freezing action at sporting events. A moderate shutter speed of 1/125th to 1/500th could be used for taking portraits of friends or family. If you'd like to slow things down and capture the effects of motion or blur the movement of a waterfall, select a slow shutter speed in the range of about 8 to 60. The slowest shutter speeds fall within the realm of 8 to 30 seconds. These shutter speeds will typically be used for photographing subjects at night. The ISO setting affects the imaging sensor's sensitivity to light. The higher the number, the less light that is required to properly expose the image sensor. You can either have the camera automatically choose the sensitivity or you can set it manually. It's a good idea to set the ISO speed to suit the ambient light setting that you're shooting in. When you increase the ISO speed, a higher number. For low light, a faster shutter speed can be used to avoid camera shake. Set the ISO speed by pressing the ISO button and while looking at the control panel, turn the main command dial to set the desired ISO speed. Keep in mind that a higher ISO setting will introduce noise or grain into your images. An ISO setting that is too high for the shooting conditions will make the images lose quality, and you might even start to see particles in your pictures. Experiment with ISO settings to become more familiar with their range and control. The image sensor on your camera is very powerful. It gives you the flexibility to shoot in low light conditions and still get amazing pictures. The next setting is the shutter priority mode. It's indicated by an S on the control panel. Use this mode when you want to set the shutter speed and have the camera automatically select the correct aperture value. Using the exposure mode button and the main command dial, set your camera's exposure mode to S. Rotate the main command dial to set the shutter speed. Use the shutter priority setting to freeze or blur motion in your subjects. The next setting on the mode dial is A, or Aperture Priority Mode. When shooting in this mode, you'll set the aperture value and then the camera will calculate the shutter speed necessary for a proper exposure. This mode is useful if you want to create a short or long depth of field. To use this mode, hold down the exposure mode button and rotate the main command dial until you see an A appear on the control panel. Turn the main command dial to select an aperture value as you watch the display either on the control panel or through the viewfinder. Once you've made your selection, press the shutter button halfway down to focus and all the way down to take the picture. Use Aperture Priority Mode to blur backgrounds for portraits or bring both the foreground and background into focus for landscape shots. When the f-stop is a small number, the aperture has a large opening, letting in more light, creating a short depth of field. This blurs the background and foreground. When the f-stop is a large number, the aperture has a small opening, letting in a small amount of light, creating a long depth of field. This keeps the background and foreground in sharp focus. Remember, you can change the ISO setting to make your image more or less sensitive to light to match the ambient light you're shooting in. The next advanced shooting mode is Manual, or M mode. This mode gives you complete control of your camera. In manual mode, you will set the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO to create the exposure. To operate the camera in manual mode, hold down the exposure mode button and rotate the main command dial until you see an M appear on the control panel. To set the aperture, rotate the sub-command dial, press the shutter halfway. The exposure setting will be displayed in the viewfinder and on the control panel. The exposure level mark lets you see how far you are from the standard exposure level. Check the exposure level and set the desired shutter speed by rotating the main command dial. The D300 offers exposure bracketing. In exposure bracketing, the camera varies exposure compensation with each shot. Only one photograph is produced each time the shutter is released, meaning that several shots are required to complete the bracketing sequence. Exposure bracketing is recommended in situations in which it is difficult to set exposure and there is not enough time to check results and adjust settings with each shot. To set up exposure bracketing, choose AE to vary the exposure level. Press and hold the function button. Rotate the main command dial to choose the number of shots in the bracketing sequence. The number of shots is shown in the control panel. Pressing the function button, rotate the sub-command dial to choose the exposure increment. At default settings, the size of the increment can be chosen from 1/2, 2/3, and 1 EV. Frame the photograph, focus, and shoot. The camera will vary exposure shot by shot according to the bracketed program selection. Modifications to exposure are added to those made with exposure compensation, making it possible to achieve exposure compensation values of more than 5 EV. While bracketing is in effect, a bracketing progress indicator will be displayed in the control panel. A segment will disappear from the indicator after each shot. Bracketing is useful for combining a series of exposures in editing software like Photoshop. By using the best exposed areas of the pictures, you can create one amazing picture by blending the exposures you want from the separate bracketed pictures.